So I designed this whole yard, rendered all of it out in 3D, and then my life fell apart and I changed everything, changed the whole thing. So we're starting from scratch, let's go. Hi, I'm Daryl. I'm a sustainable landscape designer, and I help clients all over the country transform their wasted and wasteful outdoor spaces into functional, beautiful landscapes. But sometimes when you do something professionally, you don't take the time to actually do the work for yourself, which means I myself have a yard unbecoming of a professional. This is the year we fix that. So this summer, I'm partnering with Garden for Wildlife to spread the word on native plants and transform my Salt Lake City yard into a sustainable landscape and a native wildlife habitat certified by the National Wildlife Federation. I'm taking you along with me every step of the way, so follow along to watch my yard transform. Thanks for watching. So I'm a landscaper, professional landscape designer, but I have a completely unlandscaped yard, especially the front yard, which is nothing but grass everywhere. And so what we need to do is to get rid of all of this grass and put in like an absolutely fabulous cottage garden that complements the historical architecture of my home, since I live in a 1930s Tudor cottage. So this bluegrass, while she's in happy shape because of this temperate spring and summer we've been having, she's gotta go. She's out of here. And we're gonna be putting a cottage garden in its place that is also going to be a certified wildlife habitat through the National Wildlife Federation. That's why you're here. That's why you're watching this video. That's why you're here with me on this journey. What this yard currently has is grass, and some like house flipper adjacent builder's grade landscaping that was put in 2 buyers ago from whoever flipped this house. And they didn't do a great job of on the flipping, but I did get this that is now 10 feet tall, and we're gonna maybe prune her in a little bit. I live in a 1930s Tudor cottage, and what that means is there's no other choice. I don't make the rules. This has to be a cottage garden. There are certain genre-related elements of a cottage garden that are pretty necessary in order for it to be recognizable as a cottage garden. The cottage garden architectural style, it's rooted in like English cottage design. So this comes from way over across the pond, hundreds of years ago. And in order to replicate it with native plants, native to where I live in Utah or to anywhere in the US where you live, you have to kind of mimic the feel, the textures, the heights, the colors. But we're not just going to fill this with roses and boxwoods and other very, very traditional English garden plants, because then we wouldn't be benefiting the wildlife that we want to be benefiting in this yard. Before we start talking about what native plants we should be putting in the yard, let's talk about what makes a cottage garden. There are a couple of major elements that you could put in right away that would immediately make a yard identifiable as a cottage garden. One would simply be a fence, typically a picket fence, because cottage gardens originate all the way back to those walled gardens, those English walled gardens that they used to have secret gardens and whatnot. And on a smaller degree, that can be mimicked with like a picket fence or something that encloses it. So this is something that you have to enter and walk through versus like a typical front yard or landscape. So if you don't have the budget for a wooden fence, then you could mimic that structural feeling by using woody shrubs or taller grasses or things in order to create that sense of enclosure so that it feels like you're stepping into a room, you're stepping into a new place. That's probably the number one thing you're going to want to achieve with a cottage garden. Number two, it's just the look and feel of these English cottagey plants. Roses being number one, but obviously English roses, not native to the US. So what we need to do is kind of mimic the look and feel by using shrub roses or wild roses or even other woody shrubs that flower in a similar but not exact sort of way to mimic the feel and texture and color of an English rose without it actually being an English rose, because we want the birds and the bees and the butterflies to enjoy themselves in this garden. The same goes for all of the herbaceous perennials. So in an English cottage garden, you might see a lot of rosemary and lavender and these sort of just really kind of low to the ground, lush, fuzzy plants. We're gonna do that with native plants instead. And then there are elements of a cottage garden that are really easy to replicate no matter what kind of plants you use. Plant really densely, really lushly. We don't have a lot of bare soil in a cottage garden. And don't be afraid of color. I want to see purples, pinks, yellows, greens, blues, and don't be afraid to kind of mix and match them together. A cottage garden is not the time to be really conservative when it comes to your color choices and just the sheer quantity of plants that we're gonna be shoving into the ground. Let's go, let's do do it. I'm not going to come after you if you're using rosemary, for example, or lavender, or plants that are non-native, even a rose, right? I'm not gonna come after you if you're using a beautiful climbing rose or English rose in your garden, because they're lovely, wonderful plants and they don't create a lot of harm. They're just not creating the max benefits of a native plant. However, if you plant an invasive species because you really like the look of it, we're no longer friends. So I'm just saying, if you wanna be friends, we're gonna take English ivy off the table, okay? We're gonna take anything that could cause ecological harm off the table. So if you really love a plant and you wanna put it in your cottage style garden, just give it a quick Google, find out what the native range is. If the native range is not your native range, put that plant name into the search bar and then type invasive ? At the end. That's all you gotta do. If it's not a noxious weed in your state, county, city area, you can probably get away with it, but I would still recommend doing at least 80% native plants on the overall square footage of your yard, because that's what's necessary to create the maximum benefit for all of the birds, bees, and butterflies in your area. Okay, so we didn't capture this on camera, but what we just witnessed was a hummingbird absolutely just dive bomb this other bird away from the tree. So that means that the hummingbird is nesting in the, oh, it did it again. So the hummingbird's nesting in the tree, and the hummingbird is like, swallows, I don't really want you in this tree right now because I'm trying to take care of my babies. And that's why we're doing this. That's why we're making this whole yard thing happen. It's for the hummingbird babies. I want to see them. So I've sold you on the cottage garden. You want to plant a cottage garden just like me, but what plants are you going to pick to mimic the look and feel of a cottage garden but that are native to your area? I'm gonna give you a bunch of suggestions, but again, I need you to double check that these are actually native to your region, because the United States is a very big place and there's stuff native to the East Coast that isn't native to the West Coast and vice versa. So just give it a Google, okay? But here's some examples. For those big woody shrubs, azaleas, rhododendrons, wild roses, shrub roses. Those are going to give you that like big hedge-like structural feeling that we see in cottage gardens a lot. I would definitely put these up against those fences, again, to kind of create that enclosure, that sense of stepping into a magical new place. Then for an herbaceous layer, so this is the thing, if we're, come down with me. This is down here, okay? In an English garden, daisies, lavender, rosemary, in this 1.5 foot off the ground. If you really like the look of English daisies, for example, then we're gonna move you towards cone flowers. This could be like purple cone flowers, echinacea, depending on where you live. This could also be asters. Asters are an amazing pollinator supporting plant that are native to much of the US. You'll want to check to see which varieties of asters are native to you, but they have beautiful, small, daisy-like flowers, and they come in all sorts of colors. There are actually very few landscape designs that I don't put asters in because they're so beneficial to wildlife and also just freaking cute, and that works really great in a cottage garden. So both coneflowers and asters, coreopsis, those sort of things will mimic that daisy feel that we want to go for. If you want to mimic lavenders, things like that, let's look at penstemons. Let's look at hummingbird mint. Again, you're going to want to Google to make sure that whatever you choose is truly native to your region. Or if you live on the Midwest or the East Coast, you could check out Garden for Wildlife. They are a partnered company of the National Wildlife Federation, and they sell collections of these native plants that work perfectly in a cottage garden. They sell them online and then they get shipped to you, and it's a really great deal. Like I said, they're available for most of the Midwest all the way to the East Coast, and they're expanding to my hometown and beyond very, very soon. So if you live on the West Coast or in the Mountain West, just keep checking back for updates. I'm honestly just really excited about this as a service, because as someone who spends literally hours in nurseries looking for native, were we not in nurseries today looking for native plants and putting native plants in a design? Yes. As someone who spends hours doing this, it is hard. It is truly hard to get your hands on commercially available native plants. So the fact that there's a company out there that is making it easy and getting these plants not just in your hands, but shipped to you so that all you have to do is put them in the ground, I'm not gonna shut up about it. And I'm so excited about it. And they'll be perfect in a cottage garden, as we will continue to talk about. Because again, these herbaceous perennials, these pollinator supporting plants, when you plant all of these amazing colorful natives together, you're going to mimic that cottage garden look. I'm partnering with Garden for Wildlife to transform this whole yard into a native wildlife habitat, right? And so I made a plan to do this, an actual landscape plan rendered out and everything weeks ago. And it had the cottage style fence, fence. It had the perennial plantings. It had an evergreen privacy barrier to separate my yard from commercial areas that are next door. And it was good. It was perfect. We were moving forward. And then like my life kind of fell apart a little bit. And then I ended up changing a significant portion of the design. And what happened was that while I was trying to meet all of these deadlines and work on this design as well as the content around this design, my dog started acting really sick, which is going to be hard for me to talk about, but I'm going to try to like hold it, keep it together for you because I think the context is important to show you what I'm working on now. She started acting really sick and we were taking her to vets, and the whole thing was like 2 weeks of this, of just misery and confusion and not knowing what was wrong. And we ended up getting an MRI and she, sorry for the bummer, y'all. She ended up having a brain tumor that was taking up like a third of her brain. Like it was completely way too large to do anything about. And I promise this has a point. Like I promise I'm telling you this because it's... Anyway, so we lost her. We had to let her go. And coincidentally, my grandfather also died on the same day, which was not cool. That was not great. So like 2 or 3 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, I have to change the entire design, or at least a significant portion of the design. So for all the years that I've been living in this house, we've been very close to a vet's office, and the people who visit the vet's office end up parking nearby our home, and they end up using a big chunk of our lawn to like let their dogs walk around. The dogs end up using it as a bathroom and whatnot. And for so many years, I viewed that as such an annoyance. And even when I was taking my permaculture design class, like you have to write down these outside threats and things that you want to design around and problems you want to solve. And one of the main problems I had was pollution and foot traffic and people just letting their dogs use my front yard as a bathroom all of the time. And I was mad about it. I was annoyed about it. And I wanted to put up a bunch of fences, like the cottage garden fences, and a bunch of privacy trees, which I have rendered in my old design. And then I lost my dog and it's like, I don't want to be mad at these people anymore. They're just taking care of their dogs. They're just waiting for the vet's office to take care of their dogs. And so this whole corner, and we can try not to show too much of my neighborhood, but also kind of show what we're dealing with here. This whole corner neighbors a parking lot, and instead of putting a fence here like I was originally planning to keep everybody who's taking their dogs to the vet off of my lawn, I'm going to cut a big corner of it out and put the fence kind of back here in an L shape and have a big 8x16 square rectangle here for folks to sit and rest with their dogs and have an actual place to wait, because a lot of people wait outside. So anyway, it's gonna look like this instead, and it's gonna have like a little bench, like a little seating area for the people to sit with their dogs, as well as a little pet waste station, because you know, they don't clean up after themselves now, and that's why I was annoyed. So we're gonna provide the resources for them to do so. And then I also want to do like a little free library that we can put like pet treats and toys and stuff, so that if anybody needs that for their dogs, they can take it. And maybe some people will leave some stuff as well, but we'll make sure that we keep it stocked. At the end of the day, a permaculture design principle is to turn problems into solutions, and I viewed this as a problem for so long, and I just kind of want to make peace with it and just have more happy dogs. And now, like, you know, it gets to be a wildlife habitat and also a domesticated animal space too. So we get to support animals on both fronts. So that's the plan. I'm really excited about it. I'm crying. It's fine. It's fine. Cut. We're gonna take a break. So now that we got that embarrassing mess out of the way, we can talk about the fence, because now that we've put the dog area into this plan, the footprint of the fence is changing. So this is gonna stay grass. I'm actually gonna work with the vet's office to figure out who's gonna maintain the grass, and if I'm gonna mow it once a week, that's fine, because it's a pretty controlled area, but we're gonna keep that for the dogs because they need some grass to hang out on. So then once the fence stops here, we're actually now going to do a cute little cottage garden border along the sidewalk in front of the fence. So the fence is actually going to take a turn here and go this way. There's going to be a gate where you can then enter my yard. Again, that's creating that sense of enclosure that we were talking about, where you're stepping into a cottage garden. And a path is going to come this way and connect over here towards the front door. We're going to do collections of native plants along all of the pathways, and then some big woody shrubs that are native, like elderberry and serviceberry, to frame those things out. We're also going to do a Utah native columnar juniper called the skyrocket juniper to create a couple of blocked sight lines between our house and the commercial areas over there. So that's what's going in here. Over here, we're doing a little bit of negative space, and by negative space, I mean I'm just not letting things grow up too tall, because I want to still still preserve a sense of like orderliness and calm when somebody walks by the street and looks at my house. I don't want it to look like they have to machete their way through a jungle in order to get to my front door. So I'm gonna be carving out a large oval shape. It'll be right in here so that when you're walking on the sidewalk and then you cast your gaze this way towards the front door, you have that negative space, and it's going to be a native wildflower meadow. I'm going to be doing the base of the meadow being a mix of Utah native ryegrasses. These are warm season grasses, which means that they're dormant in the winter. They come alive in the summertime, needing way less water than a traditional cool season grass or a Kentucky bluegrass lawn. And then intermixed within that ryegrass is going to be Utah native wildflowers. So Indian paintbrush, silvery lupine, Rocky Mountain columbine, a bunch of others, as well as some showy milkweed, which is the Asclepias speciosa. That's the milkweed that's most native to the Rocky Mountain region and the Wasatch Front region where I live, in order to help out those monarch butterflies. I'm also going to be doing another version of that meadow, just using more shade tolerant varieties of grasses and flowers underneath the maple tree over here. I don't like having to mow. I don't know about you, but I don't like having to mow around trees. I think you start to feel really silly when you're just walking around in a circle a whole bunch. I usually solve that problem by planting a bunch of perennials or shrubs or things under trees so that you don't have to go in there and mow at all. But another solution would be just to put meadowy style grass, so grass that can grow like 8 to 10 inches tall and flop over, or wildflowers or things that you're just kind of cool with it being lusher and messier, because then you don't have to push a mower around in a circle. And we're not doing that anymore over there. Meadow here, meadow there, cottage collections of Utah native plants all around the meadow. That's what we're doing. No matter what kind of yard you're actually designing, no matter what kind of architectural style you're following, whether it be cottage or arts and crafts or mid-century modern, you still have to do the work to find native plants that work for your design. And the truth is that a lot of different native plants can work. So if you have to choose any of them, which ones should you choose? Like if you had to pick a small handful, which ones should you choose? And the answer is keystone species. There are a handful of plants, probably more than a handful of plants, that supply the max number of birds, bees, and butterflies with benefits. So these are plants that if you remove them from the ecosystem, you would see like a real negative impact. And if you bring them back into an ecosystem, you see a real positive impact. A keystone species that we already talked about a little earlier in the video, aster. And it's a keystone species for almost every single ecoregion across the entire US. It's just different varieties that are better for certain areas versus others. Where I live in Utah, another surprising perhaps keystone species is the common sunflower. Not only do native pollinators love it, but it also can serve as a bird feeder for birds, and it's just a really helpful, beneficial plant. The truth is that the United States has dozens of ecoregions, right? And all of them have different keystone species. So I live in a cold desert that borders the northwestern forested mountains. There are northeastern temperate forests. There's the Pacific Northwest ecoregions. There's Mediterranean California climate regions. So I can't give you an exhaustive list of keystone species. That information is available online, and Garden for Wildlife does ensure that they have keystone species available in their plant collections. So if you live in a region that Garden for Wildlife serves, you can order their plant collections and then have these incredible keystone species shipped right to your door. And if you don't live in an area that they serve, check back, because they will be there soon. They're working on it. I know, I got a guy on the inside. So in my yard specifically, the keystone species that are definitely gonna be in here, smooth aster, tickseed coreopsis, and the common sunflower, all of which are gonna look absolutely amazing in my beautiful little enclosed cottage garden. We know what's happening over on this side of the yard. We know what's happening with the little doggy area. We're gonna go over to this corner now. When you enter the path behind where we're standing now and you follow it this way, you're gonna be brought to the gate going into my side yard, which is where my Utah native food forest is going to be. So I think of this as like the pre-food forest. We're gonna do some native edible perennials here as well, like a serviceberry and an elderberry, so that we can sort of create some height that you feel like you're walking through a cute little tunnel, not quite a closed canopy, but there's gonna be some height here. Now that serviceberry and elderberry over here are going to be the tallest plants in this food forest, but then I'm going to round out the food forest with permaculture style plant guilds. That means that they're going to be closely grouped collections of plants that are all serving different functions. So obviously, when you're designing a food forest, the first thing that you design for is what do you want to eat? So in this case, we have elderflower syrup and service berries. That's the first function that we're stacking. As a function, there are 4 other main categories we want to consider when building a permaculture style plant guild. That's attracting beneficial insects, deterring pests, fixing nitrogen, and also creating free fertilizer. And the plants that do that are called dynamic accumulators. Attracting beneficial insects, guess what does that? Native pollinator plants. So we kind of have that covered throughout the yard already, but we are still going to be pulling them through and planting them under the serviceberry and elderberry, specifically more shade tolerant ones like columbine, because they love living under these sort of like woodland forest environments. Those are going to attract all of the native beneficial insects that maybe prey on other pests. They also pollinate the fruit trees and the elderberries that we want to produce. And in general, we just need them. So that's why we're planting this entire yard out, actually. The next one is deterring pests. And the 2 main types of plants that do this are alliums as well as really fragrant herbaceous perennials. I'm going to be planting garlic throughout as actually green garlic. That means you don't have to wait until the bulbs are finished. You can actually just harvest the shoots and eat those. That's stacking another function because not only is it deterring pests, it's also edible. And then I'm also going to be planting chives for the same reason. They're edible and they also deter pests. And I think chive blossoms look really cute. Sue me. The third category is nitrogen fixation. And if you don't know what a nitrogen fixer is, that's actually a plant that absorbs nitrogen from the atmosphere and then fixes it into the soil through the plant roots, which means that it is fertilizing and healing and nourishing your soil just by existing. This is a little tricky, however, because most nitrogen fixers are in the legume family, and legumes don't necessarily like alliums, which we just talked about are really good at deterring pests. So you need to sort of weigh your pros and cons and go for 3 out of 4 of these categories. Don't plant clover and alliums next to each other because the clover will suffer, but maybe you have an area in your food forest where you know that those plants aren't maybe as susceptible to pests. Go for a legume ground cover that's going to fix nitrogen into the soil. Whereas if you're growing berries and strawberries and stone fruits and things where you think the pests are really going to get in there, maybe we do allium companion plants without the nitrogen fixing plants. So use your judgment with that. But both have very distinct, albeit separate benefits. And the last one, this is a really cool one. This is where we get really nerdy. It's a thing called a dynamic accumulator. And what is a dynamic accumulator, you ask? Let me tell you. It is a plant that has a taproot that's able to reach down into the subsoil and access nutrients that were previously in the topsoil but are no longer bioavailable to the plants that you have planted, and then grab nutrients that are way down there and just suck them right back up and store them in the biomass of whatever that plant is. And a couple of examples of dynamic accumulators are comfrey, little known one, the dandelion. We don't like dandelions. They have a bad rap, but they actually do a really great job of storing nutrients in their biomass, which means that you can use them to make fertilizer. I could go on and on listing all of the different types of dynamic accumulators, but for me, it really works well to plant a bunch of comfrey around my fruit trees, and then once a month or so, harvest a bunch of it, make a quick fertilizer tea. This is not fancy, by the way. You chop the leaves and you put them in a Lowe's or Home Depot bucket and fill it up with water, and you wait a little while, and then you pour that on your plants. But it's free fertilizer forever. You grow the fertilizer, you use the fertilizer, the soil's better, it grows more fertilizer, you use the fertilizer. Are you following? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Yes. Great. This food forest area and then the food forest area in the side yard beyond, we're going to have the edible yields, dynamic accumulators, nitrogen fixers, pest deterrents, and beneficial insect attractors. And that's what makes a food forest a food forest. So that's it. That's the entire plan for my front yard, which will hopefully meet all of the requirements to become a National Wildlife Federation certified habitat. And what that means is that I've provided cover, places for birds, bees, and butterflies to hunker down and hang out. I'm hoping that the dense collections of shrubbery and native plants that I'm doing will serve as the cover for those animals, so that will check off that requirement. Number 2, we have the food sources, and if you've been paying attention for this entire video, you're gathering that the native plants we're planting are the food source, so that's covered. Number 3, places to raise young. If the hummingbird that has lovingly told us to back off twice is any indication, that maple tree is already serving as a really solid place to raise young. So I think that that requirement is successfully met. Number 4, there needs to be a water source. And because this is a cottage garden, we're definitely going to do a bird bath, because is there anything more cottagey than an adorable little bird bath? So that's going to go right over here under the maple tree, which I'm really excited about because the maple tree will provide a little bit of shade, prevent some of that water from evaporating. And I know that so many birds use this tree that they'll have quick and easy access to that water. The fifth and final requirement is just that you transform your yard into a habitat using sustainable practices. So that means eradicating the use of inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, and whatnot, using organic fertilizers if you're going to use any, using mulch in order to conserve water and reduce your water use, making your irrigation more efficient, and so on. And the National Wildlife Federation has detailed lists of those requirements on their website, so definitely go check that out if you need a little more guidance. I like hearing myself talk as much as the next person, but at the end of the day, once we've planned everything out and talked about it to exhaustion, we have to bust out the shovels and we have to get digging. So now that I have the plan finalized and finished, I'm going to be submitting it to Utah Water Savers to get the rebate for removing all of this grass, which is going to help fund some of these endeavors. If you live in Utah and you want to swap out your grass for a sustainable lawn, you should go to utahwatersavers.com because there are probably rebates available to make that easier and more accessible for you. Getting the rebate is going to be my first step, and then as soon as that's approved, we're breaking ground, and you're going to have to just come back next time to see what progress we've made, if any. I think my yard's going to be a bit chaotic for a couple of months, but it has to look worse before it gets better, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. See you next time.